Somebody else will be in charge of denting this. Oh man, I just completely screwed all of that up. Hang on. This is very scientific right here. Probably about right there. Let's try that. Hello everyone, welcome back to Maverick Mods. For those of you new to the channel, my name is Mark. I'm in the process of doing a custom resto mod, total rebuild of a 71 Firebird that we found in a garage. Had been sitting for 20, who knows how many, 20 plus years, and basically had become home to a bunch of mice and a couple of really frisky squirrels. I kind of left you guys hanging last week with trying to do a repair on the engine cradle. Gonna finish that up this week. So we'll get into that and figure out just what the solution was. Again, for those of you new to the channel, last year I found a wrecked 2000 Chevy Z28 LS1 6-speed. That became the donor car for the Firebird. And I've taken as many, and turns out it was quite a lot, of the parts and pieces from the Z28 and have adapted them to the Firebird. So this week I'm doing that with the brake lines, and we'll get into kind of basically how to install brake lines from another car onto one that it was never designed to fit on. So that's where we're at. Grab your popcorn, let's get started. Didn't really get a consensus on fixing the dented subframe or the dented engine cradle here, and just to revisit it, let's take a look. So obviously I painted over it because at the time I wasn't quite sure what to do with it, but you can kind of see this thing is well, it had words with a curb or a parking hump or whatever it was. It bounced off of something and dented the cradle there. Pretty common. Like I said, I've gone through several ideas about how to fix this, and let's just run back through the options quickly, because I briefly covered this last week as well. Option one would be to repair this, and the question is how. And the knocking the dents out of this is not really an option. And as I said last time, if you think of it this way, you need to impart an equal amount of force to remove a dent as the force that was required to put the dent in the first place. This is probably pretty close to 1/8 inch steel. It's probably not quite 1/8 inch, but it's fairly close. And that's a 3,500 pound car slamming onto probably a piece of concrete, putting that dent in. I can't get to the back side to get something inside of here to beat this out, and I cannot exert enough force to pull these dents out. So doing that is not an option. So replacing the cradle, of course, this is not a serviceable part via GM anymore. You know, it's 4 plus sort of year-old part. You can't buy them new. And in the junkyards, basically there's none to be found that are in pristine condition, and I wouldn't put an already, you know, beat-in piece to replace a beat-up piece. So that's not an option. Repairing this is the only way to go. So I asked you guys to comment last week about the best way to repair this. I believe one comment was, we'll just fill it with Bondo. Not a good idea. One, because these dents, this one here is approaching, it's over 1/4 of an inch thick, and that's awfully thick to me. That's way more Bondo than I would ever want to fill in this area. That's problem number one with Bondo. Problem number two is that the minute it impacts something, it's just gonna knock all of that Bondo off. Because Bondo doesn't have any structural strength. Same thing with fiberglass. That's not a viable repair. Another couple of comments were cut out the damaged metal and weld in new metal. Okay, that's a good idea, except, okay, and let's start off with that's a good idea. That's a good idea because basically it cleans everything up. It wouldn't be terribly difficult to fab up a couple of pieces and just go back and scab some pieces in. Not a problem. But there was one commenter who hit the nail on the head. And that was, nothing is stopping somebody, I hope it's not me, but somebody from bouncing this thing off a curb again somewhere. You got to assume that it might happen again someday. So how do you prevent that? If I just put new metal in, it's good until it gets dented again, and then we're right back to the same problem. So my solution, I'm going to create a skid plate. I'm just going to put a plate on top of this and cover up the dents, paint it up so it looks like it was supposed to be there. So what I did, those of you that have watched the channel for a while know that I love templates. So I made myself a template. And yes, I do drink a lot of this stuff. So the template is going to fit right there. I even put in where the creases are to make it conform. And it's just going to scab right on top of that. After making the template, I cut myself a skid plate out of 1/8 inch steel. Made my bends. And she is ready to be bolted on. Okay, now you ask, why am I bolting this on? So my theory is that if this is going to be a sacrificial piece, if somebody else is going to run this thing over a curb someday and dent this, then to repair it, all you have to do is unbolt it, make a new piece, paint it up, bolt a new piece on. So I've got my piece made, I've got my bends made. All I've got to do is drill and tap the holes around the perimeter so I can bolt this on, and then when that's done and this is all finished, I'll pretty the edges up, sandblast it, paint it so that it basically looks like it's always supposed to have been there. And so next I'm going to go ahead and drill, I don't know however many it takes, holes so I can tap and screw this plate onto the engine cradle here. So one of the questions that's going to come up is, well, okay, yeah, but you're reducing ground clearance by 1/8 of an inch. I mean, yes, I lowered the car, but is that 1/8 of an inch really going to make that much difference? I hope not. And the screw heads or the bolt heads, well, I'm going to try and use some low profile pan head screws to put it on, so that it just minimizes how much is sticking down below the cradle here. Got my plate drilled, and what I did here, actually perimeter drilled all the holes. I used my number 7 bit because I'm going to tap the holes into the cradle itself, and the proper bit size for a 1/4 20 tap is a number 7 drill. That way I can guarantee that I'm on center on my initial holes. So I'm going to drill maybe one here to start with, and then that way, or actually right here and right here, that way I can get 2 bolts in, secure the plate, and then I can just drill the rest of them and know that nothing is going to shift. I've got my first 2 holes drilled, tapped, putting the screws in, going to tighten it down. This will hold it. So now I can just drill all the rest of them without having to stop. Then I can tap those holes and put the rest of the screws in. Well, if I didn't have carpal tunnel syndrome before, I've got it now just from tapping all those holes. Well, let's go ahead and just do a quick test fit with all of the screw holes tapped. I re-drilled all the holes in the skid plate itself. Let's put our original ones back where they were. Let's see if we can make this a little bit quicker. That one's just a little bit tight. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of do it this way, because that one feels like it's just a little bit off center. And this one is not going. Why is that not going in? Okay. Okay, I got one of them. Well, it looks like, well, it may be just a smidge off center. Let's see if we can force it. Let's do this by hand. Yeah, it'll go in. It's a little off. I'll re-drill that hole. Just a little oversized. All right, hopefully last time. Went in and drilled that one hole a little oversized, and I ran the tap through and cleaned those threads up again. Let's see what happens this time. I'm gonna run this one through first. See if that throws anything else off. That's all right. All right, skid plate is on. Now I'm going to clean up the edges, sandblast this, paint it, get some decent screws, and somebody else will be in charge of denting this. Item number 16,000 in the puzzle, brake lines and fuel lines. You notice I've got the ones from the Z28 kind of spread out on the floor. This is more just for orientation. I don't know if I can use these by making a few tweaks, change a few bends. I'm gonna try. I may have to make my own rear brake lines. I do have the front brake lines back in place on the cradle, and of course they're designed for this cradle, so they'll fit. Before I get too all fired crazy on mounting the rear brake lines though, I need to mount the ABS module. So this is the bracket for the ABS module, and after some consternation in trying to figure out where it went, because I made so many modifications to the subframe, it actually goes right here, and 3 out of the 4 bolts line up, and with the module in place where my hand is, all the lines actually fit. Problem is, it doesn't fit my new control arm towers, so I've got to modify this bracket a little bit. So no big deal, but this bracket comes in 2 pieces, so it's riveted, spot welded. I guess not riveted, it's spot welded in. So I've started drilling out the spot welds. Let me finish that, and I'm going to have to mount the bottom bracket and then orient the top bracket to the bottom bracket. So let me get these separated and we'll come back. So I've got the bottom half and the top half of the ABS bracket separated. So I need to mount the bottom half, and it's going to take a little bit of trimming. So let me figure out where I need to trim it. Well, oh yeah, well that's got to go immediately. Okay, let me get my Sharpie. Somewhere around here I've got a Sharpie of a different color. I really need to find that because it would help tremendously when I'm doing this. Okay, so that I know has got to go on. So I need to cut this down right there, straight up, across, down to there. Yep, okay, let me start with that and we'll do another test fit. All right, so I've got the new bracket on. I need to hang on to my socket first. I need to tighten this bracket. Damn. Tighten this bracket down. All right, so I'm good there. The reason I need to do that is I need to kind of hold the ABS pump up with the upper bracket and get as close to the original orientation as I can, because the original orientation was, let me find it here, actually a little bit farther that way. So it's going to move out a little bit, but so Distance wise is about there. Basically, if I just match this corner, I'm pretty good. I've got my upper bracket tacked to my lower bracket. Let's put everything back together. Let's see if the pump fits. It fits in there. And, oh, well, it's because it's up backwards. That would help. Like, I thought I measured better than that. And I did. Plenty of clearance. We're good. All right. With the ABS pump in place, now I can kind of start finalizing where the rest of the brake lines. The front line's not a problem because they all kind of go right here. And right, I think right over here. But the rear lines, I'm gonna have to have this in place to start working the rear lines back. Guys, this is my probably least favorite part of doing brakes. Other than drum brakes, I don't like drum brakes. But when I'm putting in a brake system, of course, here in the Firebird, I'm working on adapting the anti-lock brakes. And so I've got the, of course, you saw before, I've got the anti-lock brake motor / controller mounted. And I've got the front brake lines mounted. Now I'm working on the rear brakes. And unlike non-ABS cars, rear brakes, you got to have a separate brake line for each side. So I have to run 2 brake lines. And the reason I don't like running brake lines is no matter what you do, they never look like somebody didn't bend them by hand badly. You know, there's all kinds of benders out here. I've got a cheapie, like right here, which it kind of works sometimes, sorta. I've got another little cheapie, and I've never found a really good way to do this. The good part about this is the brake lines that came off the Z28, which is what these are, they're steel lines, so they can be carefully and gently straightened out, rebent to, there's a limit obviously, and then you can bend them back in shape. So what I've done is I've kept the factory bends down to here, and then I started bending it myself from here. And the best I've been able to do is they kind of halfway sort of look like maybe somebody didn't bend them by hand, but somebody did bend them by hand. And that's kind of where I'm at. So I've got it down to here, and just watch me struggle through getting it back to the to the end of the trans tunnel. That's kind of where I'm stopping on this with the brake lines. All right, so now I will clamp all these in place. I've got some clamps, and I've got it, you know, I mean, they'll look halfway decent when I'm done, but they're only gonna look halfway decent, unfortunately. So I'm gonna work on this right here, make this bend. I think my little tool might actually work for this. There's no way I can tell you how to use this thing because I really haven't quite figured it out myself. I know you stick that in there. Make sure that you got the angles right because you don't want it to wind up bending off that way yet, anyway. And so get it in the right slot for the right tube. That one comes like that. And you also need to make sure that they're bent where you need them to be bent. So I think that's pretty good there. Because one of the things I'm always real bad about is I'll have a nice little bend in a brake line and then it winds up overlapping on top of the other one that I'm trying to keep them all separated from. So I guess a little bit more is better than a little bit less. That's not too bad. I mean, like I said, I'm gonna clamp all these in place anyway, so they'll kind of sit right there. Now, I need it to kind of come up the trans tunnel, so I need to make this bend to get that going that way before I make this bend to bend it all the way in. So this one's there, that's gonna go above it, so I need to bend it This is very scientific right here. Probably about right there. Let's try that. With steel brake lines, you can bend them by hand. Just work slowly. Whoop, went too far. Like I said, by the time you're said and done, it winds up looking like you bent your brake lines by hand, because that's basically what winds up happening. Take out that bend I put in before. Like I said, just work it slowly so that you don't kink the line. Like I said, that's the nice thing about it. If these lines were stainless, there's no way I could do this. Stainless lines, you bend them once and they're done. Okay, so I've got this part done. Like I said, once I get them all set, then I can clamp them in place, then we'll take a look at them. But that's kind of brakes. Yay! I think I'm close enough to try and actually start securing some of these lines. And so I went in and drilled myself a hole, tapped it for a 1/4-20 bolt. And unfortunately, I didn't get to stop by my favorite hardware store this morning that has all of the good fasteners, so I had to go to another box store that has terrible fasteners. But I'll wind up replacing those as I get to them. So this is going to be the first one. Let's go ahead and just get it cranked down. So I'll go ahead and wind up replacing this fastener with something that just looks a little bit better, but this will just hold everything in place for now. I'm just going to work my way down and start anchoring this where it needs it. Alright. Well, that doesn't hold that very well. Okay, plan, well, let's see. Alright, well, I'm going to keep working my way down and see how I do. Let's see, if I was smart, I would have done all this before painting everything in the mock-up phase, but I'm not that smart. So I've got to do it now. Fix my little clamp here, it's a little off-center. In case you guys haven't figured it out, it's raining like the dickens out there right now. Like I said, I will replace these crappy fasteners with something, you know, a little bit more stylish, but this will get it going for now. Update on the running the fuel and brake lines. So I left off with the brake lines, went ahead and replaced a few of the fasteners with slightly better ones. I'm not a big fan of the Phillips head here, but these are basically, they're never going to be removed by me, hopefully. And you know, there's so much equipment and whatnot in the way there. If there's any more high profile areas, I may come up with a slightly better one, but for now I think they'll do okay. So I've run the rear brake lines. I'm holding off just a little bit because I've got to get the fuel line mounted so the fuel and the brake lines all look like they're not, you know, crisscrossing each other. But I've got to hold off on the brake lines at the ends here, and the reason for that is the rear brake line setup, which I've got on the ground here, is eventually going to wind up, I think it's something like this, it's going to wind up, you know, up in here somewhere. So the bracket that I'm holding is going to be mounted to the rear end. Probably somewhere, I guess around here somehow. But this other bracket, I've got flex lines here that are going to go to my hard lines. And so I've got to be able to mount this bracket to the body. And until I get the rear end in place, I don't know exactly where to mount this. So I've got to hold off on my brake lines, my hard lines, right there for now until I can get the final adjusted fitting position when I can mount this bracket. So I moved on to the fuel line, and this is the main fuel feed. This actually came from the Z28 as well. Didn't require quite as much adjustment as the brake lines did, so I was pretty happy about that. It's basically going to ride right here. You can see I've already gotten to the point where I need to clamp it in place so I can do the final adjustments on the ends up to here. And of course this is just kind of stopped right here because I'll have to make the final bends. So the idea is that the fuel line is going to come out right about here, loop around to the where the fuel rail is going to be, and this will be a flexible line here. On the back I've got a T that I'm going to have to figure out where to put, because this system uses, it's a returnless from the fuel rail itself, so there's no fuel return from the fuel rail. The return is actually off of this T, where the fuel filter, this end of the T, which will actually be up here, will go to the fuel pump. That'll provide pressure through here and will pressurize the main line. Coming off this side of the T is the fuel filter that will then come back and route a line back to the fuel pump hat itself, where the fuel pressure regulator is. So I've got to plumb all of that. But before I do too much of that, I need to start mounting the center portion of the fuel line, just so that I know exactly where everything's going to be. So let me get that started and we'll come back. All right, I promise, this is the final update on fuel and brake lines. Probably spent way too much time on this already. The last couple of things I need to do before, well, actually I can't do them now, and I'll show you why, until I get the fuel tank in and I get the rear end in, so I can do the final fitment where everything needs to go so everything clears and doesn't hit anything. One is a fuel filter, and yes, I am going to get a new fuel filter. This is just, you know, for test fit purposes. I think the fuel filter is going to fit really well, basically right here, right in there somewhere. Now, of course, this line does not match there, so I'll have to come up with a either a flexible line or bend this line so that the filter fits. As far as the rest of it, I've got my fuel lines, brake lines mounted, secured. Everything's good. I might have to come in once in a while, maybe just do a little bit of a wrap with tape or a little wrap with a piece of rubber just to keep them from rattling. I'm probably going to do that. Everything's good and solid, good and solid. I can't finish up the location here until I get the engine transmission in. Same deal. I'm pretty sure I've got enough room here in the firewall. I don't think I'm going to have to move this, and that's pretty solid, secure there, so that's good. Brake lines, everything's good. I'm going to wind up putting probably a final set of clamps somewhere around here, but I need to hold off because I just want to make sure when my steering shaft comes out right, actually it's going to come out right about there. Just want to make sure I don't have any clearance issues right in here. Trying to think 4 steps ahead, and I'm only making 2.3 steps at this point, but I am trying to think ahead. Well, that's going to do it for this week, guys. Oh, I can't, I just can't. I can't leave you hanging on the skid plate. So, let's see if I can get some kind of a good shot and angle from it. So the skid plate's installed, and of course it's not fully installed. I'm still waiting on the shallow head, pan head Allen screws. Love McMaster Car, not a sponsor, but I get a lot of my specialty fasteners from them. They just didn't show up in time for me to actually install them. So we'll see that down the road a ways. And I got a little preview for you for what's going to come up, not next week, but the week after. So that's what's coming up in 2 weeks. This coming week, next week, I guess you could say, taking a little vacation. Gonna be gone for a few days, take a little time off. I'll still put out a video next week. It just won't be Firebird content. It's gonna be something really, I might be going out on a little bit of a limb with next week's video. We'll see. At any rate, certainly appreciate everybody watching. Big thanks to all you guys for tuning in. I can't say thank you enough. Please like, share, subscribe, notify, what else? Did I forget anything? Blah, blah, blah. You know the drill. Everybody,
See you next week. Have a great day.